No doctor could heal the alien emperor until a human single mom did. They impossible. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Sarah Morgan stood in the cramped medical bay of the interstellar hospital ship, her hands trembling as she held the diagnostic scanner over a caller child's bruised arm. The ship orbited a dying colony world, and Sarah had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes carried the weight of exhaustion that only a single mother working 2 jobs could understand. Back on Earth, her daughter Emma was staying with Sarah's mother, probably asking when Mommy would come home. Sarah had taken this contract job because the pay was triple what she made at the clinic in Detroit, and Emma needed braces, new shoes, and 1,000 other things that single-income households struggled to afford. The Calarian child whimpered, and Sarah's training kicked in despite her fatigue. She smiled softly, the same smile she gave Emma when her daughter scraped her knee or had a bad dream. Sarah didn't speak Calaran, but kindness needed no translation. She gently wrapped the child's arm, her movements efficient but tender, and the child's parent made a clicking sound that the translation device rendered as gratitude. Sarah nodded, feeling that familiar warmth in her chest that reminded her why she became a nurse in the first place. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about helping people, about easing suffering wherever she found it. The alarm shattered the moment. Red lights flooded the medical bay, and the ship's communication system crackled to life with urgent Calaran speech. Sarah's translation earpiece struggled to keep up, but she caught enough words to understand the gravity of the situation. Imperial ship, emergency docking, critical patient, all available medical personnel report. Immediately, Sarah handed the caller child to their parent and rushed toward the main medical suite, her heart pounding. She'd been in space for 6 months now, working on various hospital ships and medical stations, but she'd never encountered anything involving the Valyrian Empire. The Valorans were the dominant power in this sector of the galaxy, a species that had conquered or allied with over 300 worlds. They were massive, standing nearly 8 ft tall, with crystalline scales that shimmered in rainbow patterns across their bodies. Their technology was centuries ahead of humanity's, and they treated most other species with cold efficiency at best and outright disdain at worst. The docking bay doors hissed open, and Sarah joined the crowd of medical personnel assembling near the airlock. Calarian doctors, Fraxian surgeons, pollen medics, all of them murmuring nervously. The translation devices created a cacophony of overlapping languages, but the anxiety was universal. When the airlock finally opened, 6 Valyrian guards marched through, their armor gleaming like polished diamonds, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. Behind them came a floating medical pod surrounded by 4 Valyrian physicians whose scales had lost their usual luster, dulled by stress and exhaustion. Sarah caught a glimpse of the figure inside the pod through the transparent upper section, even unconscious and clearly suffering. The being commanded presence. His scales were deeper and richer than the other Valorans, shifting between deep purple and midnight blue, and his frame was larger, more powerfully built. 3 crystalline horns curved back from his head marking him as royalty. The head, Calarian doctor, a wizened physician named Thern, stepped forward and bowed. Deeply, the lead Valyrian physician, a female with silver-tinted scales, spoke. In clipped, urgent tones, Sarah's earpiece translated, the silver-scaled physician said, His Majesty Emperor Zarkin has been afflicted with the withering for 17 cycles. We have exhausted every treatment in the Imperial Medical Archives. Every physician in the Empire has examined him. He deteriorates further each day. We were advised that this facility hosts physicians from multiple species. We seek. She paused, clearly struggling with the words outside perspectives. Thern gestured for the Valyrian physicians to bring the pod into the main medical suite. Sarah followed with the other personnel, staying toward the back. She was just a nurse and a human. One at that. Humans were new to the galactic community, barely 3 decades since first contact, still seen as primitive by most established species. She had no business being anywhere near an emperor. The medical suite was the most advanced room on the ship, filled with equipment from a dozen different worlds. The Valorans transferred their emperor to the main examination platform, and the assembled physicians crowded around. Sarah hung back, but her eyes were drawn to the emperor's face. Even in his suffering, even unconscious, there was something striking about him. His features were more refined than the other Valorans, almost elegant, and his breathing was shallow, labored. The silver-scaled Valyrian physician, who introduced herself as Dr. Nira, began explaining the emperor's condition. The withering was a rare disease that attacked the crystalline structure of Valyrian physiology. It caused the scales to crack and crumble, the internal crystal matrix that supported their organs to deteriorate, and eventually resulted in complete system failure. It was always fatal. The emperor had perhaps 20 more cycles before the damage became irreversible. The other physicians began their examinations using scanners and probes from various medical traditions. Sarah watched, absorbing information, her mind automatically cataloging symptoms and treatments, even though she knew she had nothing to contribute. She'd seen something similar once, though hadn't she? Not exactly the same, but back in Detroit, there had been a patient with a degenerative bone condition that the doctors had struggled to diagnose. Hours passed. The physicians debated and theorized, running test after test. The Valoran guards stood at attention, their faces carved from stone, but Sarah could see the tension in their postures. Emperor Zarkin was clearly beloved, or at least respected enough that his death would have serious consequences. Dr. Nira grew increasingly agitated as each test came back inconclusive or negative. She snapped at the other physicians, her scales flashing angry reds and oranges. The translator rendered her words as sharp and cutting. Sarah found herself feeling sorry for the emperor, lying there unconscious while everyone argued over him like he was a puzzle rather than a person. Finally, Dr. Nira dismissed most of the non-Valorian physicians with barely concealed contempt. She said this was clearly beyond their primitive understanding. Only the 2 other senior doctors remained. Sarah should have left with the others, but something made her linger near the back of the room, pretending to organize medical supplies while keeping one eye on the emperor. As the night cycle approached, even Thern admitted defeat. The condition was Beyond his expertise, Dr. Nira looked like she might shatter something. Guards shifted uncomfortably. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy so strong it surprised her. Here was the most powerful being in this sector of space, and he was just as vulnerable to disease as anyone else, just as alone in a way, surrounded by people who saw him as a problem to solve rather than a person who was suffering. Sarah found herself approaching the examination platform, her feet moving before her brain caught up. Dr. Nira turned sharply, her scales flashing warning colors. The translator rendered her words as, "What is this creature doing here?" Theron stepped between them. He said, "This is Nurse Sarah Morgan, one of our human staff. She is competent." Dr. Nylora, she meant no disrespect, but Sarah wasn't looking at either of them. She was looking at the Emperor's hands, or rather the equivalent. His fingers were long and crystalline, and she could see tiny fractures running through them like spiderweb webs. The pattern was familiar. Too familiar. Sarah spoke quietly. "I might know what this is." The room went silent. Dr. Nira's scales went through 3 different colors before settling on a furious orange. She said, "You, human, think you understand what the greatest minds in the Valyrian Empire could not?" Sarah met her gaze steadily. She said, "I treated a human patient once with a condition that looked similar, not the same, but similar. The fracturing pattern, the way it spreads. It wasn't a disease." Theron's translator rendered his interested tone perfectly. He said, "What was it?" Sarah said, "It was a nutritional deficiency, an imbalance of minerals that affected bone density and structure. The human body needs specific trace elements to maintain skeletal integrity. When those elements are missing or out of balance, the bones start to deteriorate in a pattern almost identical to this." Dr. Nira made a sound that didn't need translation. It was pure scorn. She said, "The Emperor has the finest diet in the galaxy. Every meal is analyzed and optimized. Your theory is absurd." But Sarah had seen that flicker of something in Theron's eyes, doubt maybe, or hope. She pressed on. She said, "When was the last time the Emperor's diet was changed?" Dr. Nira hesitated. She said, "His Majesty adopted a new nutritional regimen approximately 20 cycles ago. It was designed by our top nutritionist to optimize his health and extend his lifespan." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She said, "And the symptoms started 17 cycles ago." The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Nira's scales slowly shifted to a pale, uncertain blue. She said, "That is correct, but the correlation is meaningless. The new regimen was scientifically formulated. It is superior in every measurable way to his previous diet." Sarah took a breath. She said, "May I see the analysis?" For a moment she thought Dr. Nila would refuse, but Theron nodded, and one of the guards produced a data tablet. Sarah took it, her hand steadier now. The information was dense, written in Valyrian medical notation, but the translation software did its best. She scrolled through pages of nutritional data, comparing the old regimen to the new one. There she saw it. The new diet had increased protein synthesis compounds by 30%, boosted cellular regeneration stimulants by 45%, and optimized nearly every measurable nutritional factor, but in doing so it had eliminated several trace minerals that the original diet contained, elements that the Valyrian nutritionists had deemed unnecessary vestigial requirements from the species. Evolutionary past, Sarah said these 3 elements, she pointed them out on the tablet, they were removed from the emperor's diet because your nutritionists thought they served no purpose. But what if they do? What if Valerie and crystalline structure requires these specific trace elements to maintain integrity, even if they don't show up in standard biological scans? Dr. Neera snatched the tablet back. She studied it for a long moment, her scales cycling through colors too quickly for Sarah to follow. Finally, she said, "This is speculation, primitive intuition, not science." The stepped in. Again, he said, "But it is testable speculation. We could analyze the Emperor's crystalline matrix for these elements, compare the concentrations to healthy Valorans." Dr. Neera's scales flashed with internal conflict. Finally, she said, "Very well, but when this proves fruitless, the human will be removed from this facility." The test took 6 hours. Sarah dozed in a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. But she jerked awake when Dr. Neera let out a sound that the translator rendered as profane astonishment. The Valyrian physician was staring at a holographic display, her scales pale with shock. She said, "The concentrations are virtually non-existent. The 3 elements the human identified, they are present in healthy Valorans at significant levels. In His Majesty, they are nearly depleted. The timing correlates exactly with the dietary change and the onset of symptoms." Thern said, "Then the treatment is simple, reintroduce the elements." But Dr. Neera shook her head. She said, "It is not simple. The damage is extensive. Merely reintroducing the elements will not be sufficient. The crystalline structure must be actively rebuilt, and the Emperor's body is too weak to do so naturally. We would need to provide the elements in massive, concentrated doses while simultaneously stimulating cellular regeneration, all without overwhelming his compromised systems. The margins are impossibly narrow. Too much and we kill him, too little and the treatment fails." Sarah stood up. She said, "What if you combined it with bone marrow stimulation protocols?" Dr. Neera turned to her. The Valoran's expression was unreadable, but her scales had shifted to deep blue. Thoughtful, she said, "Valorans do not have bone marrow." Sarah said, "But you have a crystalline matrix that serves a similar function. On Earth, when we treat severe osteoporosis or bone diseases, we sometimes use electrical stimulation to encourage bone regeneration, small targeted pulses that activate the cells responsible for building bone tissue. If we could adapt that principle." There was nodding. He said, "We have similar techniques for Caloran shell regeneration. If we could modify the frequency and intensity for Valyrian physiology." The room erupted in activity. For the first time, the various physicians worked together, combining knowledge from multiple medical traditions. Sarah found herself in the middle of it, her suggestions taken seriously now, her human perspective valued rather than dismissed. Dr. Nalero was still cold, still imperious, but she listened when Sarah spoke. They worked through the night and into the next day cycle. The treatment protocol they designed was complex, requiring precise timing and constant monitoring. They would introduce the missing elements intravenously, combined with a cocktail of cellular regeneration stimulants adapted from Threxian medicine. Simultaneously, they would use modified Caloran bioelectric stimulation to encourage the Emperor's crystalline matrix to actively rebuild itself. The whole process would take days, maybe weeks, and any misstep could be fatal. Dr. Nira insisted on beginning immediately. She said, every moment we delay, His Majesty deteriorates further. The first treatment session was terrifying. They hooked the Emperor up to so many machines that Sarah couldn't count them all. Monitors tracked every vital sign, every chemical process, every energy fluctuation in his crystalline structure. Dr. Nylera administered the first dose of minerals with hands that shook slightly, betraying her iron composure. For 3 hours nothing happened. The Emperor remained unconscious, his breathing shallow, his scales dull. Sarah stood by his side, monitoring his vital signs, adjusting the bioelectric stimulation frequency based on real-time feedback from the scanners. She found herself talking to him softly, the way she did with patients back home. She told him he was doing great, that his body was strong, that he just needed to hold on a little longer. One of the Valyrian guards gave her a strange look, but Dr. Nira said nothing. The Valyrian physician was too focused on the holographic displays, watching for any sign of improvement or deterioration. Then, just as Sarah was beginning to lose hope, one of the monitors beeped. The crystalline density in the Emperor's left hand had increased by 3%. It was tiny, almost within the margin of error. But it was something. Dr. Nira said, again, we administer the next dose in 6 hours. The second treatment showed more improvement than the third. By the 5th treatment session, the Emperor's vital signs had stabilized. The fractures in his scales stopped spreading. By the 10th session, they began to heal. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was working. Sarah barely left the medical suite. She slept in chairs, ate ration bars standing up, and spent every waking moment monitoring the Emperor's progress. Thern tried to send her to rest properly, but she refused. She'd started this, and she was going to see it through. On the 7th day, the Emperor's eyes opened. Sarah was alone with him, adjusting his bioelectric stimulation pads when she heard him draw in a deeper breath. She looked up and found herself staring into eyes that were like looking into deep space, dark and infinite and filled with swirling colors. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the Emperor spoke, his voice rough from disuse. The translator rendered his words as, "You are human." Sarah nodded. She said softly, "Yes, Your Majesty, my name is Sarah Morgan. I'm a nurse." He studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back, but she held her ground. He said, "Dr. Nylera informed me that you identified my condition, that your what did she call it? Primitive intuition saved my life." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. She said, "It wasn't intuition, Your Majesty, it was just pattern recognition. I'd seen something similar before." The Emperor's scales shifted through several colors. Sarah wished she knew what they meant. He said, "You have tended me. I remember your voice. You spoke to me while I was unconscious." Sarah nodded again. She said, "I talked to all my patients. It helps sometimes. Lets them know they're not alone." Something changed in the Emperor's expression. His scales settled into a warm gold color. He said, "I am called Zarkin. When we are alone, you need not use titles." Sarah blinked. She said, "I don't think that's appropriate, Your Majesty." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, he said. I am an emperor who was dying because my nutritionists removed vegetables from my diet. Appropriateness has lost some of its appeal. Despite herself, Sarah smiled. She said, they were trace minerals, not vegetables, Zarkin said. The principle stands. How long was I unconscious? Sarah said, nearly 8 days. We've been treating you around the clock. You're improving, but you're not healed yet. You need to rest. He looked at her for a long moment. He said, and you, when did you last rest properly? Sarah opened her mouth to say she was fine, but a yawn overtook her. Zarkin. Scales flashed with what might have been amusement. He said, physician, heal thyself. She said, I'm a nurse, not a physician. He said, on my world we do not distinguish. Those who heal are honored equally, regardless of their specific role. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Nylera entered the medical suite. When she saw the emperor awake, she rushed forward, her scales flashing with relief and joy. She spoke rapidly in Valoran, too fast for the translator to keep up. Zarkin responded in the same language, his tone calm and reassuring. Dr. Nira turned to Sarah. Her scales were a mixture of colors Sarah couldn't interpret. She said, the emperor requests that you continue to oversee his treatment personally. Sarah said, of course. I'll coordinate with you on the treatment schedule. Dr. Nira's scales shifted again. She said, I have been instructed to defer to your judgment on all matters related to His Majesty's care. Sarah stared. She said, but you're the senior physician. You know Valerie and physiology far better than I do. Dr. Nira said stiffly, His Majesty has spoken also. She paused, her scales flickering. I was wrong about you, about humans. Your approach to medicine is different from ours, but it is not inferior. You saved His Majesty when I could not. For that you have my respect. It might have been the most difficult thing the proud Valoran had ever said. Sarah nodded, accepting the olive branch. She said, we make a good team, Doctor. Your knowledge combined with fresh perspective, that's what saved him, not me alone. Dr. Nira's scales shifted to a softer blue. She said, you are gracious, Nurse Morgan. I begin to understand why His Majesty wishes you to continue his care. Over the following weeks, Sarah spent hours each day with Emperor Zarkin. She monitored his treatments, adjusted his medications, and slowly, inevitably, they began to talk about things beyond medicine. He asked about Earth, about her life, about why she had come to space. She found herself telling him about Emma, about the struggles of single parenthood, about the constant juggling of bills and responsibilities, and trying to give her daughter a good life despite everything. Zarkin listened with an attention that felt almost overwhelming. When she finished, he said, your devotion to your offspring is admirable. Among my people, royal children are raised by professional caretakers. I barely knew my parents before I reached adulthood. Sarah said, that sounds lonely. Zarkin's scales shifted to a somber purple. He said it is. The burden of rule is isolating. One cannot show weakness or favoritism. One must always be the emperor first and a person second, if at all. Sarah said gently, maybe that's part of why you got sick. Stress weakens the immune system in humans. Maybe it affects Valerie in health too. He looked at her thoughtfully. He said, my physicians never considered such things. They treat the body as a machine, separate from the mind or emotions. Sarah said, The body and mind aren't separate, though. They affect each other. If you're stressed or lonely or unhappy, your body suffers. If your body is sick, your mood changes. It's all connected, Zarkin said. This is human medical philosophy. Sarah shrugged. She said, it's common sense, but yes, human medicine tries to treat the whole person, not just their symptoms. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I would learn more about this, about your human approaches to health and well-being. Would you teach me? Sarah smiled. She said, I'm not a teacher, but I can share what I know. And so, in addition to his treatments, Sarah began bringing him books and articles about human medicine translated into Valerian. She explained concepts like bedside manner, patient advocacy, and holistic care. Zarkin absorbed it all with a hunger that surprised her. He asked endless questions, challenged assumptions, and began to see medicine in an entirely new way. Dr. Nylera noticed the change in her emperor. She said to Sarah, one day His Majesty is different, more engaged, more curious. You have done more than heal his body. Nurse Morgan, you have reminded him what it is to be truly alive, Sarah said. I've just been talking with him, being honest, Dr. Nylera said. Precisely. No one is honest with the emperor. Everyone tells him what they think he wishes to. Here, you treat him as an equal, as a person. It is revolutionary. As Zarkin's health improved, he began leaving the medical suite for short periods. He insisted Sarah accompany him, serving as both his medical attendant and increasingly his friend. They walked the observation decks of the hospital ship, looking out at the stars. He showed her holographic displays of Valoria, his home world with its crystal cities and rainbow skies. Sarah showed him pictures of Emma, her bright-eyed daughter with a gap-toed smile. Zarkin studied the images with fascination. He said, she has your eyes, your warmth. You must miss her greatly. Sarah's throat tightened. She said, every day, but this job, the money will help give her opportunities one never had, a better education, a safer neighborhood, maybe college. Someday, Zarkin said, you sacrifice your time with her so that she might have a better future. This is love in its purest form. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. After a moment she said, what about you? Do you have children? Zarkin's scales went dark, almost black. He said, no, I have been too focused on my duties as emperor. There have been arrangements suggested, political marriages that would strengthen alliances, but I have always refused. I will not bond with someone I do not. He paused, his scales flickering. Someone I do not truly know. Sarah heard the loneliness in his voice. She said gently, you deserve to be happy too, you know, not just to be a good emperor. He looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't name. He said, I am beginning to understand that. You have taught me much. Sarah Morgan, the use of her first name sent a flutter through her chest. She said, I haven't taught you anything. You're just remembering things you already knew. He said, then you have reminded me. Either way, I am grateful. By the 6th week of treatment, Zarkin was nearly healed. His scales had regained their full luster, shifting through vibrant colors based on his emotions. The fractures had disappeared entirely. His strength had returned, and he moved with the natural grace and power of a healthy Valerian. His prime, Dr. Nylera declared him fit to return to his duties, though she recommended continued monitoring for Several more months, Sarah should have been celebrating. She'd helped save an emperor's life. She'd made a genuine contribution to interstellar medicine. But instead she felt a growing sadness. Once Zarkin left, she'd return to her regular duties, and eventually her contract would end, and she'd go home to Earth. She'd probably never see him again. The night before Zarkin's scheduled departure, Sarah was completing her final rounds when she found him standing in the observation deck, silhouetted against the stars. She almost turned away, not wanting to intrude, but he said without turning, "Please join me, Sarah." She walked to his side. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars drift past. Finally Zarkin said, "I have been considering my future. The Empire requires my presence, but I find myself reluctant to return to the isolation of the palace, to the endless cycle of duty and solitude." Sarah said, "You could change things. You're the Emperor. If anyone has the power to make their life different, it's you." He turned to face her. His scales were a deep, warm gold. He said, "I could, but such changes would require support, guidance, someone who sees me as a person rather than a symbol." Sarah's heart was beating too fast. She said, "I'm sure there are many people who care about you," he said. "Perhaps, but there is only one who saved my life, not because I am emperor, but because I was a patient who needed help. Only one who speaks to me without fear or calculation. Only one who has shown me that there is more to existence than duty." Sarah said softly, "Zarkin," he said, "I am asking you to stay, not as my nurse, though your medical expertise would be valued, but as my," he paused, searching for the word, "my advisor, my friend, my link to a way of thinking that my people have lost. I am asking you to help me remake the Valyrian approach to medicine, to care, to how we treat those who are vulnerable." Sarah's mind raced. She said, "I have a daughter. I can't just abandon her." Zarkin's scales shifted through several colors. He said, "I would never ask you to abandon your child. Bring her here. She would be welcome, honored. She could receive the finest education the Empire offers. You could see her every day, be part of her life while still doing meaningful work. You would both be under my personal protection. Want for nothing." Sarah said, "That's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity, even from an emperor." He said, "It is not charity. It is an alliance. You would be my chief medical advisor with a salary appropriate to that position. You would help me reform the imperial medical system, train our physicians in your human approaches, ensure that what happened to me never happens to any of my people again. This is work of vital importance." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. His scales were cycling through colors that she'd learned to read over the past weeks: hope, uncertainty, determination, and underneath it all, something deeper, something that mirrored the feeling growing in her own chest. She said, "Why me, really?" Zarkin's scales settled into the warmest gold she'd ever seen. He said, "Because in my darkest moment, when I was dying and alone, you spoke to me with kindness. Because you see me, truly see me, not the crown or the power or the symbol. Because you have reminded me what it feels like to be treated as a person who matters beyond their utility." And because he paused, his scales flickering, "Because I believe I am falling in love with you, and I have never felt this way before, and it terrifies me, but I do not wish for it to end." Sarah's breath caught. She said, I'm a single mother from Detroit. You're an emperor. This is impossible. He said, you told me once that you did. The impossible when you identified my condition. Perhaps we can do the impossible again, Sarah thought of. Emma, of the opportunities she'd have in the empire, of the work she could do, the lives she could change, of the man standing before her, powerful and vulnerable all at once, offering her not just a job but a future, a partnership. She said, Emma gets to finish the school year on Earth first. I want to approve her in the middle of the term. Zarkin's scales exploded into brilliant, joyful colors. He said, agreed, and she must approve of me. I will not come between a mother and her child. Sarah smiled. She said, she's 8. She's going to think you're either the coolest thing ever or the weirdest thing ever. Possibly both. He said, I will endeavor to be more cool than weird. Sarah laughed, and before she could think better of it, she reached out and took his hand. His crystalline fingers were warm and surprisingly smooth. He looked down at their joined hands with wonder, as if he'd never held hands with anyone before. Maybe he hadn't. She said, this is crazy. You know that, right? He said, I have been informed that humans have a saying, something about fortune favoring the brave. Sarah said, fortune favors the bold, and yes, we do say that, usually right before doing something stupid. Zarkin's scales shimmered with amusement. He said, then let us be bold together, and if it is stupid, at least we will not be stupid alone. Sarah squeezed his hand. She said, I need to make a call to my mom. Tell her I'm extending my contract. She's going to have questions. Zarkin said, tell her the truth, that you are helping to reform alien medicine and dating an emperor. I am certain she will find this perfectly reasonable. Sarah laughed. She said, you've never met my mother, but yes, I'll tell her the truth. Eventually, maybe I'll start with the job offer and work up to the rest. Over the following months, Sarah's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. She did return to Earth to spend time with Emma, and to her relief and slight terror, she brought Zarkin with her. The Emperor of the Valyrian Empire traveling to Earth was a diplomatic incident of the first order, requiring coordination between 3 governments and more security personnel than Sarah could count. Emma's reaction when she met Zarkin was everything Sarah had hoped for. Her daughter took one look at the massive crystal cowled Emperor, squealed, you're like a dragon, and proceeded to ask him 8,000,000 questions without pausing for breath. Zarkin, to his credit, answered every single one with patience and good humor. Later, as they sat in Sarah's tiny apartment that suddenly felt even smaller with an HFY emperor in it, Emma curled up between them on the couch and said to Sarah, I like him, Mommy. He's nice and pretty. Can we keep him? Zarkin's scales had turned the softest rose color, and Sarah had to cover her mouth to hide her smile. She said, well, he's not exactly a pet baby, but yes, he's going to be around a lot. How would you feel about maybe living somewhere new, a place where we'd have more space and you could go to a really good school and we'd all be together? Emma considered this seriously. She said, would I still get to see Grandma? Sarah said, of course, we'd visit all the time, and Grandma could visit us. Emma said, okay, as long as we're together. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She said, always, baby. Always together. Zarkin reached out tentatively and rested his large hand on Emma's small head. His scales were glowing with warmth. He said, I make You this promise, young Emma. I will do everything in my power to ensure your mother is happy, that you are safe and cared for, and that your family stays together. This I swear." Emma looked up at him with absolute trust. She said, "Okay, you can definitely be my dragon." Now the transition took time. Sarah completed her contract, then officially accepted the position of chief medical advisor to the Valyrian Empire. She and Emma moved to Valoria into quarters, the palace that were larger than any home Sarah had ever dreamed of owning. Emma enrolled in the Imperial Academy, where she was the first human student, and quickly became a celebrity among her alien classmates. Sarah threw herself into her work. She established new training programs for Valerie and physicians, emphasizing patient-centered care and holistic treatment approaches. She worked with medical professionals from dozens of species, creating the first truly interspecies species medical exchange program. The reforms she championed started slowly but gained momentum as physicians saw the results. Patient outcomes improved, satisfaction increased, the rigid cold efficiency of Valyrian medicine began to warm with compassion, and through it all her relationship with Zarkin deepened. They moved slowly, carefully, both aware of the scrutiny they faced. Sarah was subject to vicious gossip in some circles, called everything from a gold digger to a xenofeticist. Zarkin faced pressure from his advisors to make a more politically advantageous alliance. But they persisted. They spent evenings talking for hours, sharing meals, learning each other's cultures. Zarkin attended Emma's school performances with the same seriousness he brought to state functions. Sarah learned Valerian court etiquette and politics, becoming a fixture at his side during official events. They made each other laugh. They challenged each other. They built something real. 2 years after Sarah first diagnosed Zarkin's condition, he proposed, not with a ring, because Valorans didn't use rings, but with a crystal grown from his own body, shaped by his own hands into a pendant that shimmered with every color of his emotions. He gave it to her in private, with only Emma as a witness. And his words were simple. He said, "I do not know what I did to deserve you in my life, but I know that I do not wish to imagine a future without you. Will you bond with me, Sarah Morgan? Will you be my partner in all things, my co-ruler, my love?" Sarah said yes through tears, and Emma cheered and tackled them both in a hug that sent Zarkin scales flashing with surprised delight. The wedding was a diplomatic event that required months of planning. Representatives from 300 worlds attended. Sarah wore a dress that combined human and Valyrian design elements, white silk with crystalline accents that caught the light. Zarkin scales cycled through every color of joy and love throughout the ceremony. But for Sarah, the most important moment wasn't the grand ceremony. It was afterward, in their private quarters, when Zarkin scooped up a sleepy Emma and carried her to her bed, tucking her in with a gentleness that made Sarah's heart ache with love. Emma mumbled, "Good night, Dragon Daddy," and Zarkin scales went soft with emotion. He turned to Sarah, who was watching from the doorway. He said softly, "I never imagined this, a family, a home, love. You gave me all of it." Sarah crossed to him and took his hands. She said, "We gave it to each other. That's how family works." He pulled her close, careful of his strength, and they stood together in comfortable silence. After a moment, he said, "My advisors informed me today that your medical reforms have reduced treatment failures by 43% across the empire. Deaths from previously incurable conditions have dropped by 31%. You are saving thousands of lives every day." Sarah leaned into him. She said, "We're saving them. This was a team effort," he said, always so modest. "Very well, we are saving them together, as we will face all things from now on together." Sarah tilted her head back to look at him. She said together, and they were. Over the years that followed, Sarah and Zarkin became true partners in every sense. She revolutionized medicine throughout the Valyrian Empire and beyond. He supported her work completely, putting the full weight of his authority behind her reforms. They raised Emma together, watching her grow into a remarkable young woman who bridged human and Valyrian cultures with ease. More importantly, they changed how the empire functioned. Zarkin, influenced by Sarah's human perspectives, began implementing reforms beyond medicine: worker protections, education initiatives, environmental conservation programs. He became known as the Compassionate Emperor, and while some of the old guard grumbled, the people loved him for it. Sarah never forgot where she came from. She established scholarship programs for medical students from less developed worlds, giving others the opportunities she'd had. She returned to Earth regularly, maintaining her ties to humanity, even as she built a life among the stars. And on quiet evenings when official duties were done and Emma was busy with her own life, Sarah and Zarkin would stand on the palace balcony and look at the stars. He would wrap his arms around her, his scales warm against her back, and they would simply be not emperor and advisor, not alien and human, just two people who had found each other in the vastness of space, who had built something impossible and beautiful together. Sarah sometimes thought back to that exhausted nurse on a hospital ship, desperate to make enough money to give her daughter a better life. She thought about how close she'd come to never speaking up, never approaching that examination platform, never meeting the eyes of a dying emperor and seeing the person beneath the crown. One small act of courage, one moment of seeing someone else's suffering and choosing to help, that was all it had taken to change everything. Emma, now 16 and impossibly grown, joined them on the balcony one evening. She stood between them and Zarkin, put one arm around her while keeping the other around Sarah. Emma said, "Mom, my history teacher asked me today what the most important moment in interspecies relations was. You know what I told her?" Sarah said, "What, baby?" Emma said, "I told her it was the day a human nurse looked at an alien emperor and saw a person who needed help. I told her that's when everything changed, when we stopped seeing species and started seeing people." Zarkin scales shimmered with pride and love. He said, "Your daughter is wise beyond her years." Sarah smiled, her heart full. She said, "She takes after her dragon." "Daddy," Emma groaned. She said, "Mom, I'm 16. Can you please stop calling him that?" But she was grinning, and so was Zarkin, his scales bright with happiness, and Sarah looked at her family, this impossible, beautiful family that had been built from kindness and courage and love, and thought that maybe the impossible was just what you called miracles before they happened. Years continued to pass. Sarah's medical reform spread beyond the Valyrian Empire to influence galactic health care standards, the inter-size medical exchange program she founded became the model for cooperation across countless fields. Human medical philosophy, with its emphasis on treating the whole person and centering patient dignity, began to reshape how advanced species approach care for their most vulnerable, and it all started because a tired single mom from Detroit looked at a dying emperor and saw a patient who needed help. When Sarah was much older, a young Calarian physician asked her once what the secret was. How had she known what to do when the greatest minds in the empire had failed? How had she seen what others missed? Sarah thought for a long moment, then she said, I didn't see anything special, I just saw a person who was suffering and I wanted to help. I think maybe that's the secret, not being the smartest or having all the answers, just caring enough to try, just seeing people as people, no matter how different they look from you, just being willing to speak up even when you're scared, even when you're just one person and everyone else is telling you you're wrong, the young physician said. But what if you had been wrong? What if your guess had been incorrect? Sarah smiled. She said, then I would have been wrong, but at least I would have tried. At least I would have added one more perspective to the search for answers. The emperor was dying. Doing nothing wasn't an option. Being paralyzed by the fear of being wrong wasn't an option. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and try. That conversation, recorded and shared throughout the medical community, became a cornerstone of the new approach to medicine that Sarah had championed. Care over caution, compassion over protocol, people over procedure. The human who had saved an emperor did more than heal one person. She reminded the galaxy what it meant to heal it all. Sarah lived a long, rich life. She saw Emma grow up, fall in love with a Threxian artist, and give her grandchildren that Sarah never imagined she'd have. She continued her medical work well into her later years, training new generations of physicians in her human-centered approach, and through it all, Zarkin was at her side, his scales still shifting with love. Whenever he looked at her, when Sarah was very old, lying in a comfortable bed with her family around her, Zarkin held her hand with the same gentleness he had shown since the beginning. Emma and her children were there, along with what seemed like half the empire, all wanting to say goodbye to the human who had changed their world. But Sarah didn't feel sad. She felt complete. She had lived a life beyond anything she could have dreamed. She had helped people. She had made a difference. She had loved and been loved in return. Zarkin leaned close, his scales a soft warm gold. He said, thank you, Sarah Morgan, for everything, for saving my life, for teaching me how to live, for giving me a family, for showing me what it means to truly care. Sarah smiled, her eyes closing. She said, thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for loving me, and my daughter, for being my impossible miracle. Emma took her other hand, tears streaming down her face. She said, I love you, Mom. You made everything possible. Sarah squeezed both their hands. She said, love you too, baby. Love you both. Love this whole impossible life, and with her family around her, with the knowledge that she had left the galaxy a better place than she found it, with the warmth of love surrounding her like a blanket. Sarah Morgan closed her eyes and let go. The galaxy mourned the human nurse who became an empress, who revolutionized medicine, who changed the course of History with one act of compassion was gone, but her legacy lived on in every physician who put patients before protocol, in every person who chose courage over fear, in every moment someone looked past differences to see the person underneath. And in a crystal palace on Valoria, an emperor stood on a balcony and looked at the stars, his scales the deep purple of grief, but also the gold of eternal love. He held a crystal pendant that shimmered with every color of emotion, a gift from the woman who had saved him in every way. Person could be saved. Zarkin spoke to the stars. He said, "Rest well, my love. Your work continues. Your legacy lives on. You did the impossible, and the galaxy is better for it. I am better for it. I carry you with me always." And somewhere in the universe, maybe Sarah heard him. Maybe she smiled. Maybe she knew that the love they built, the change they made, the lives they touched, would ripple outward forever. Because that's what happens when you choose courage, when you choose compassion, when you see people as people and refuse to let fear silence your voice. One single mom from Detroit, one dying emperor, one moment of incredible courage, and everything changed. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments. Whether positive or negative, your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like.